The Great Custard Pie Panic. Scott Corbett. Illustrated by Joe Matthew. This time I really have you in my power, Dr. Merlin cries. Nick and his dog Bert have walked right into Dr. Merlin's trap. "Hey Bert," says Nick, "look at that fog." Nick and his dog Bert were taking a walk. Something exciting had happened the last time they took a walk in the fog, something he had never dared to tell anybody. "Remember Dr. Merlin's magic shop?" asked Nick. Bert growled. Dr. Merlin had given them both a bad scare. They turned the corner by the drugstore, and now it was so foggy they could hardly see where they were going. "This fog is as spooky as the last one," said Nick, "and I think we're getting near the place where Dr. Merlin's magic shop was." Bert growled again. They walked on, looking at every shop. None of the signs said Dr. Merlin's magic shop. All at once Nick stopped. He smelled fresh bread. It smelled better than any bread he had ever smelled before. They were in front of a shop he had never seen before. The sign on it said, "Auntie Nellie Rim's Bakery." On the door were two small signs that said, "Grand Opening, Welcome." Nick said, "Smell that bread. I'm going in and buy a loaf." Nick could not stop himself. The bread smelled so good, but Bert whined and dragged his feet. Nick had to pull him in. The bakery smelled even better inside. A long glass case was full of bread and pies and cakes and cream puffs and brownies and sugar cookies. Behind the counter stood an old lady. Her hair was piled high. She wore a big round pair of glasses. She had a funny sort of strap under her chin. She was very odd looking, but that did not bother Nick. All he could think about was how good the bread and the cake and the cookies smelled. The old lady smiled at him sweetly. "Welcome," she said. "Thank you for coming to Auntie Nellie's new bakery." "Are you Auntie Nellie?" "Yes, indeed." Nick looked around the shop and began to have a strange feeling. "Do you know what shop was here before you moved in?" he asked. "No, I don't," said Auntie Nellie. "Why do you ask?" "Well, the last time we came this way in the fog, Bert and I found a shop called Dr. Merlin's Magic Shop." "Very interesting," said Aunt Nellie. "And who was Dr. Merlin?" "He was a magician. He was going to do a terrible magic trick with Bert, but we got away." "What a dreadful man," cried Aunt Nellie. "You should have had him arrested." "I wanted to, but he got away, and his whole shop disappeared." "Imagine that! But why did you go into his shop?" "Because I like magic. I can do a few magic tricks myself." "My goodness," said Aunt Nell. "I like magic too. Would you like to see me do a magic trick?" "Sure." "Very well." Aunt Nellie picked up a sign. She held it up in front of her for Nick to see. It said, "Nellie Rim." "This is my name," she said. "Now then, see what is in the middle of my name?" She held up another sign, "Nellie Rim." "You see, part of my name is a lie," she said. "We take the lie out, and what is left?" She held up a third sign. It said, "Nell Rim." "Now," she said, "make the first and last letters change places. Then make the middle two letters change places. And what do you have? Nick stared at the sign. Merlin! He shouted. Right you are, said Aunt Nellie, in a very different nasty voice. Off came the piled up hair. It was a wig. Off came the big round glasses. Off came the chin strap. Suddenly, Nick was looking at a very tall, thin old man with long white hair and a white beard which the chin strap had hidden. The old man put a pair of small, funny-looking glasses on the end of his long, thin nose. Yes, I'm Dr. Merlin, he said, chuckling slyly, and because you're so smart, I'm going to give your dog a prize. Here, Bert, here's a nice cookie. Don't eat that, cried Nick. But he was too late. Bert grabbed it and swallowed it. The instant he swallowed it, he stood as still as a statue. Bert! Cried Nick. He stooped down to touch Bert. He picked him up. Bert was as stiff as a doll. His eyes looked like the button eyes of a stuffed animal. Nick set him back on the floor and stared at him in horror. Dr. Merlin laughed a horrible laugh, and his glasses danced on the end of his long, thin nose. This time I really have you in my power, he cried, and if you ever want to see Bert move a muscle again, you must let me try my magic trick. Nick was shaking. Do you mean the same trick as last time? He asked. Certainly not, said Dr. Merlin, his eyes flashing. This one is much better. What do you want to do? You remember Arthur? Yes. Well, Arthur is a very smart dog, and your dog Bert is every bit as smart. So I'm going to bring Arthur in here and stand Arthur and Bert side by side. Then, with a wave of my magic wand, I'm going to add Bert's brain to Arthur's. Arthur will become the smartest dog in the world. Nick gasped. But then Bert won't have any brain at all, he cried. Dr. Merlin held up his hand. Don't worry about that. I have another brain all ready for him, a mouse brain. With another wave of my magic wand, I will give Bert the mouse's brain. Dr. Merlin gave a wicked chuckle. I've always wanted to see how a dog would act if he thought he was a mouse, he said. But I don't want a dog who thinks he's a mouse, cried Nick. Dr. Merlin held up his hand again. Now, I was only joking, he said. But Nick did not believe him. You behave yourself and maybe I can find a better brain for Bert. We'll worry about that later. He smiled slyly at Nick. I'll call Arthur. Then I'll change into my work clothes, he said, rubbing his hands together. Chuckling again, Dr. Merlin walked through a door into the back room of the shop. Nick did not know what to do. He could not run away and leave poor Bert standing there. He could not take Bert with him the way he was, and he could not let poor Bert end up without any brain. Nick knew very well what Dr. Merlin meant when he talked about changing into his work clothes. Nick looked around wildly. He was looking for the magic wooden staff Dr. Merlin had used before to help him change. Leaning against the wall was a long, shiny pole. It appeared to be made of some strange new kind of metal. Look, Bert! Maybe that is Dr. Merlin's staff, cried Nick. Poor Bert stood like a statue, not moving a muscle. Nick touched the pole and looked at it very carefully. Near its top was a little plastic stick with the letters punched into it. The sticker said, "This end up." Well, said Nick. He was thinking hard. If the sticker said "this end up," then it must be important to hold the staff that way. Nick could hear Dr. Merlin calling out the back door. "Arthur," he was calling. "Arthur, come in, I need you." Carefully, Nick peeled the sticker off the staff. He held the sticker in one hand, then took hold of the staff with his other hand. The staff was very light. He turned it carefully so it was upside down. He stuck the little sign back on again. Then he heard Dr. Merlin say, "Ah, there you are, Arthur. I have something for you." Nick pushed the pole back against the wall. He jumped away from it just as Dr. Merlin and Arthur came through the doorway. Arthur was a big white dog. He sat. Down in the doorway and looked at Bert with surprise. "Now, then," said Dr. Merlin, "I'll change into my work clothes." He took hold of the metal pole and patted it. "I have a new magic staff," he said proudly. "It's even better than the old one." He looked at it closely. "It's brand new," he said. "I have to be careful to hold it just right. Let me see. Now. Yes, this end up. Now." He struck the floor 3 times with the staff. Poof! A puff of smoke appeared. It appeared not around Dr. Merlin, but around Nick. Nick could see nothing. For an instant he choked, and then he knew the smoke had cleared. Still he could see nothing. Something was on his head and over his eyes. He lifted his hand to push it away, and the first thing he saw was a sleeve. The sleeve was so long his hand was out of sight. The sleeve was red. Then Nick saw himself reflected in the front of the glass case. The thing on his head was Dr. Merlin's tall, red, pointed hat. And the long sleeve belonged to Dr. Merlin's red robe. Nick was wearing it. It hung down and spread all around him on the floor. Dr. Merlin looked at himself. He was still wearing his Auntie Nellie dress. He stared at his new magic staff. "What's going on here?" he cried. "What is wrong with my staff?" "It was upside down," said Nick. "I took the sticker off one end and put it on the other." "Why, you little wretch," cried Dr. Merlin, wild with rage. "I'll fix you. Give me my magic hat." The magic hat. Maybe it would work for Nick. He pointed at Bert. "Bert," he said, "I command you to wake up." Bert blinked and shook himself. Dr. Merlin gasped and grabbed at Nick. "Give me that hat," he screamed. "Get him, Bert," said Nick. Bert snarled. "Grab that dog, Arthur," yelled Dr. Merlin. "Tear him to pieces." Arthur started for Bert. Bert looked at the big dog and jumped clear off the floor up onto the bakery counter. Arthur raced over and crouched, ready to spring up after him. Now Bert was using his brain again. He hit at a big custard pie with his paw. Just as Arthur started to spring, the pie flew off the counter. Whap! It hit Arthur right in the face. Then Nick got the idea. "Pies, cakes, cream puffs," he cried. "I command you to hit Arthur." At once the air was full of pies and cakes and cream puffs, all flying at Arthur. Arthur put his tail between his legs and ran howling through the shop and out the back door. Bert leaped down barking and growling and chased after Arthur. "My hat!" screamed Dr. Merlin, grabbing at Nick again. "Pies, cakes, cream puffs!" cried Nick. "I command you to hit Dr. Merlin." Whap, whap, whap. Pies and cakes and cream puffs shot through the air at Dr. Merlin. Custard pies and blueberry pies, cherry pies and lemon pies, chocolate cakes and angel cakes, with thick, gooey strawberry frosting. All of them hit Dr. Merlin. "Stop it!" he spluttered. His mouth was full of lemon pie. "Stop! Stop!" Bert came running back into the shop, right through the flying pies. He was so pleased with himself for scaring Arthur that he paid no attention to the pies. The floor was slippery with custard. When Bert tried to stop, it was too late. He slid forward, as if he were on skis, into Nick. He hit so hard that Nick fell down. The magic hat flew off his head and rolled away. "Aha!" cried Dr. Merlin. "Now I'll show you who's smart." He put his arms behind his back, leaned forward and skated across the slippery floor towards the hat. Nick stuck his foot out and tripped him. "Oh!" yelled Dr. Merlin as he fell forward into the mess on the floor. He flopped right on top of his magic hat and slid all the way to the front door of the shop. Dr. Merlin lay there for a moment. Then he sat up slowly, leaning against the door. He groaned. "You've done it again. You've ruined another of my magic hats," he said. Nick pulled off the red rope. "I can't do any more magic till I find—" "My extra magic hat," said Dr. Merlin. "Now let me see. Where did I put that hat box? Come on, Bert, let's get out of here before he finds it." Nick turned and slid and sloshed his way through the shop to the back door. Bert was close behind. Nick opened the door and they stepped out into a narrow alley. "This is the same alley we were in last time, Bert," said Nick. "Quick, let's run around to the front of the shop and call a policeman." They ran down the alley and up the street and around the corner to where the front of the shop should be. But Aunt Nellie Rim's bakery had disappeared. Only a dusty sign hung on a dirty door. "Closed," it said. "I guess Dr. Merlin found his extra hat," said Nick. He looked down at Bert. Nick licked some custard off his lips, and Bert sat down to enjoy the custard on his feet. "He's a mean man," said Nick, "but he certainly makes a great custard pie."